Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to this new question and answer session with Jitsuma Tenzin Palmo. I would like to welcome all of you on behalf of Dongyo Gatso Ling Nunnery. And of course, welcome our dear Jitsuma Tenzin Palmo, who's here with us, ready for another session of question and answers. I would like to thank all the people who have made it a point to connect with us and send in their questions and who continue to show up for the sessions. We're hoping that is beneficial for those of you who have this inquisitive mind and want to learn more about Buddhism in general. So I guess we can jump straight into it, Jitsumala. Let's go for it. Start with the first question. So it says, I try to accept samsara, my own and that of others. Months ago, I would have tried to help anyone and everyone who I saw struggling. Now, I think it's their samsara. Everyone has a samsara, so it's okay. This person has done things in a special way. Now he or she must experience unsatisfactory situations. They have an opportunity to learn. Is this a correct attitude to adopt?
Well, of course, this is samsara, and we are all the owners of our own karma, our own actions from the past. But this doesn't mean that we therefore give up on our compassion and our wish to try to help wherever we can. I mean, come on. Maybe it is that person's karma, but it might also be that person's karma to be helped by us. Who are we to say, right? So certainly we must offer help when it is feasible. If someone's drowning in a pool, we don't just let them sink with the thought, oh, well, this must be their karma. I mean, obviously we will try to pull them out, isn't it? I mean, if you have a toothache, you don't just say, well, I'm going to keep a toothache. I shouldn't go to a dentist because it's obviously my karma to have toothache. I mean, you go to a dentist and the dentist will help you, right? So, Shantideva. I just quote Shantideva because this sums it up. Shantideva says, for as long as space endures and for as long as living beings remain, until then, may I too abide to dispel the misery of the world. So that sums it up.
Indeed, and it sounds very, very different, Jitsumala, from perhaps other approaches where it seems like there has to be some kind of penance or some kind of, we must experience the suffering ourselves and also others in order to purify or to get closer to the divine. But in this case, it seems more practical that if we see somebody suffering, we just do something about it, isn't it?
Well, I mean, even in any spiritual path, I mean, there are those who are reaching out to help. Doctors, nurses, teachers, social workers, and just being kind towards everyone that we meet. I mean, any genuine spiritual tradition will teach us that much, to have a good heart. We don't have to be 8th level bodhisattvas, right? I mean, just ordinary people sunk in samsara like us. Nonetheless, we can do what we can to help.
Thank you, Jitsumala. That's very practical as always. So we can then go to the next question, which is dealing with something you've said. In your book, Reflections on a Mountain Lake, you wrote that the most commonly used practice is awareness of the breath. It is the method the Buddha used himself and through which he became enlightened. How do you know the Buddha became enlightened thanks to this practice? Many lamas say that nobody knows the practice the Buddha used to become enlightened. Besides, this practice seems to be only Shine. I thought Shine does not lead to enlightenment.
Now, according to the Pali Canon, which is the oldest set of Dharma texts which we have, please understand that Tibetans were the last people to get the Dharma before now in this present century where they get it in the West. Until then, in Asia, the last people to get the Dharma were the Tibetans. So there are many, many texts which never made their way into Tibet. And one of these was the oldest of the ones which are extant today is the Pali Canon, which is the oldest because it was sent by the Emperor Ashoka, who was about 3rd century BC. He sent his son, Prince Mahindra, and his daughter, Princess Sangamita, to Sri Lanka to convert the king and the queen of Sri Lanka, invited them to come. And they started the first monastic order in Sri Lanka, including that of the fully ordained nuns under Sangamita. So when Buddhism was effectively wiped out in India, the Sri Lankans had still got all the early texts from the time of Ashoka and had also exported them to Burma and Thailand and so forth. So that's why we still have them. So according to that account, this very ancient account in the Pali Canon, the Buddha, while sitting under the Bodhi tree just before his enlightenment, he recalled how when he was a young boy, he had been sitting under a tree watching his father, who was the king, do the ritual plowing ceremony. And he... The young prince, the bodhisattva, began to watch his breath while he was sitting under the tree, and he went into basically what was the first jhana, or the first meditative absorption. So he remembered that, and then he said that this was the right method, this was the way to go, because he had sat under the tree and said he wouldn't move from that tree until he gained enlightenment, until he became a Buddha. So he remembered that's how he did it last time. So then he entered systematically into up and down these 8 dhyānas, or meditative absorptions, which he had previously learned from previous gurus while he was searching for the way to become a Buddha. And then from that, he was able to go through all his past lives. And then in the second watch of the night, he went through all the lives of all other beings. And because of that, in the third watch of the night, he understood interdependent origination. He understood the interconnection of all beings and their karmas. And because he recognized interdependent origination both backwards and forwards, at that point he said, I'm a Buddha. In other words, he realized that he had woken up to the fullness of the Bodhisattva path and attained to full enlightenment. So, therefore, that was in the Pali Canon how the Buddha became enlightened. Of course, subsequently, different people have different versions. But shamatha practice, shine practice, is a very important prerequisite and foundation for the path. Because, it underlies, like a foundation in a building, it underlies all further construction, all further meditation, because our minds are clear and calm and attentive, and they are workable. In Tibetan, it's called lesurungwa, which literally means workable. They're subtle and flexible, and we can use the mind exactly however we want the mind to be. We want to put the mind there, it will go there. We want the mind there, it will go there. It will be very profound and deep attention and concentration. And our mind will blend with whatever practices we are doing. So with strong shamatha practice, it's very easy to accomplish all the stages on the path. That's why the Buddha very much emphasized the prerequisite of shamatha practice. So almost all Buddhist schools start with the breath. Because if we are aware, conscious of the breath, then it brings us into the present moment, because we can't breathe in the past and the future, we can only breathe now. So if we are conscious of and know the breath as it comes in and it comes out, it will in time make our mind very calm, very clear, and ready for whatever further practice we wish to do. One Lama said to me that if we have good shamatha, if we have good shine, the rest of the Dharma is in the palm of our hands. So this is why it is very important to start with getting our mind into good shape, like our body. If we get our body into good shape, then we can do any exercises. We can do anything. But if our body is out of condition and flabby, then even the simplest thing becomes a real challenge. So, like that.
Thank you, Jitsumala. Please allow me to perhaps deepen a little bit more on this particular one, because there's some terminology that perhaps we can unpack, like the term Dhyāna. Could you talk a little bit to that, what it means? What are the absorptions actually about?
Well, there are, they mean mental absorptions, and it's as progressively where the mind begins to quieten down and all the mental constituents begin to fall away, including joy, including bliss, including all these. There's just this open, spacious quality of the mind. So there are 4 what are called form or material absorptions, and then beyond those are 4 immaterial absorptions. None of them per se lead to enlightenment. The Buddha, in his search for a teacher, first found a guru who taught the 4 material mental absorptions. The mind goes into a very deep, almost trance-like state, but of course there is still knowing. There is still the quality of awareness there, but all other mental faculties fall away. And then the teacher felt that that was, liberation. But the Buddha realized that even the most refined of these mental states, we have to come back down from. They're impermanent, and therefore they cannot be liberation. So he first had a teacher who taught the material absorptions, and then one who taught the immaterial absorptions. He mastered them all, but knew that that was not the final solution. So that's why he left them and went on. Because we need the wisdom aspect. It's not just a matter of going into these very refined mental absorptions.
For that clarification, Jitsumala. So would it be fair to summarize by saying that while shamatha is indispensable in the path, it is not the entirety of the path? It is just one of the elements that we need to get.
It's a very important element, and it shouldn't be shunted aside. It makes our practice very shallow if we don't have good shamatha practice. But in and of itself, it is not liberation. It's the foundation for then building up our wisdom, our insight, our clear seeing into the nature of the mind.
Perhaps it's fair also to mention that the good point about shamatha on the breath is that we can all do it, no matter what level we're at, right? Absolutely, and that's why, and it can take you all the way if you do it really with great dedication. Usually, at a certain point, in the Tibetan tradition, when our attention is very clear and able to settle on the breath without getting lost in all our thoughts and feelings again, then they remove the attention, the mindfulness from the breath and turn it back onto the actual flow of the thoughts. Because the important thing is that we have to understand our mind. We live in our thoughts, right? Like a fish in water. The fish swims in water, but it doesn't know what is water. Likewise, we swim in a world of thoughts and feelings, but we don't know what is a thought. Most of us have never even looked to see the whole thinking process
and to recognize that it is something which is constantly flowing moment to moment to moment. Anyway, so like that, the way to get into a good ability to observe the thoughts is first to have a foundation in shamatha.
Thank you, Jetsuman. I think that clarifies a lot about the practice of shamatha, shine, and how to actually use it in the path. So then we can move on to question number 3. In your opinion, what would be the best practice when one has retired from active life, when one has more time available but less physical strength and less mental focus? Should one purify as much as possible, or accumulate merit, or go for pilgrimage, or study extensively the sutras and commentaries? When the present life is drawing to an end and the next life is close, what would be the most urgent or useful thing to do?
So then, honestly, I think this all depends on your interests and your abilities. I mean, some people love to study the Dharma more. They feel they don't really know enough yet. They want to know more. Some prefer meditation, and they want to get their heart, mind into good shape before they move on to the next incarnation. And because we must remember that what we take with us is our consciousness and our karma. And so it makes sense to put a more emphasis on how our mind, what kind of shape our mind is in. But some may feel that, you know, they did some naughty things in the past, so they need some purification. And of course, many people want to build up their merit bank account for next life. So they do what they can to make as much positive good karma. They're very generous. They give to good causes and so forth. So they go on pilgrimage, and they try to make as much good karma as possible so that next life should be as free from obstacles as possible. It's very important also to make lots of prayers of aspiration to come back and be able to meet with the Dharma as soon as possible in our next life, and have the opportunities to practice, because that also is a very, very important thing. So, I mean, actually many people I know who retired from their professional life and thought now is the time to relax and so forth, they then took on some more voluntary social work, and some of them ended up never working so hard in their lives. So anyway, we can all do whatever feels right to us, and we can do a bit of everything. We can study some more, we can read Dharma books, we can practice, we can go on retreats, we can do some social work, we can make merit and so forth. I mean, it's not sort of either or, it's everything plus. So, you know, whatever feels right for us, let's do it, you know, I mean. But most of all, what we need to do before we say bye-bye to this life is genuinely cultivate a good heart, right? And try as much as possible to be kind and helpful to others.
Okay, so the next question is a very interesting one. It has some context, so I'll read the whole thing. So it says, Buddhism defines compassion as the wish for someone to be free from suffering and from the causes of suffering, just as one would wish oneself to be similarly free. How can one truly develop compassion if one's spiritual practice actively removes one from exposure to those with ignorance and afflictive states of mind?
Where is that?
Question number 4, Jitsumura.
No, I'm saying, where
I know, right? I felt exactly the same thing with this question. It says, for example, going on long retreats, living in a nunnery with other Dharma practitioners where it's significantly more aware, more self-aware and less ignorant. Perhaps there's a little bit romanticizing here, but it continues. Also, if it is more advantageous to avoid suffering people to focus exclusively on one's realization of enlightenment for the future benefit of all sentient beings, then why don't monks also ignore suffering beings that come to the doors of a monastery, that disrupt this more important practice for a larger future benefit? If this principle applies enough to live in a nunnery and away from lay life, then shouldn't it apply in totality?
Oh, well, I mean, first of all, compassion is a very deep state of the heart, right? And it needs time to really cultivate it, along with the wisdom. Don't forget the wisdom which is needed to be able to act skillfully under all situations. People may have empathy with the suffering of others, but they don't really know how to help because they themselves are confused, right? So this is why the thousand-armed Chenrezig, the Bodhisattva of compassion, has an eye in the palm of each hand, right? Because he also has deep insight and wisdom in order to be able to respond appropriately with compassion. The two go together. So undertaking retreats and living with other Dharma-minded people helps us to develop spiritually in many, many ways, right? We breathe in to help ourselves, we breathe out to be of benefit for others. No one's saying we should ignore helping others until we're enlightened. I don't know where this idea comes from, that first we have to be enlightened, then we will help sentient beings. I mean, part of the path to enlightenment is being able to be of benefit for other beings. I mean, the two go together, right? It's not an either or, but a both and. This is our precious human body when we've met with the Dharma. And so some people choose to dedicate their whole lives to studying the practice of Dharma, but that also includes cultivating compassion for others. So it's, we use the spiritual life. Some people want to spend all their life just practicing, but not everybody does. And if you don't want to spend it doing formal practice, you can bring the Dharma into your daily life and cultivate all the qualities of the heart and mind which are needed in order to, benefit both others and benefit ourselves. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, Jitsumala, but I would like to take this opportunity perhaps to dispel a couple of myths that are, in the average person's mind connected with Buddhism and what their idea of Buddhism is. And one is concerning monastic life and monasteries, nunneries, etc., which people seem to think are, pure lands of holy beings where everybody's peaceful and completely.
You mean they're not?
I've been told they're not so much, not necessarily. But basically, to break down that stereotype of, the peaceful monk that just walks mindfully in every step, but there's also the reality of them, people being human and being just this in the same way on the path. So could you speak a little bit to that, Jitsumala?
Well, I think you said it. Monks and nuns are also human beings. And until we attain full and total enlightenment, we are still hosts to all the kleshas or negative emotions. So monks and nuns also feel, frustrated. They also sometimes get upset. They're greedy. They can be jealous. They can have all the qualities. They can be proud. They can also be lovely people, and they're also trying their best. I'm not putting them down. But they are human beings. And the idea that somehow or other, if you begin the minute you shave your head and put on robes, you transform into an 8th level bodhisattva or an arahat, it's a little optimistic. You're just a human being with a shaved head and wearing maroon robes. But the dedication is there. It's true. They're trying. And we're all trying. You don't have to be a monk or a nun to be a genuine Dharma practitioner. It's just that it's true that it does give a context in which you are together with other people who are likewise trying. And that can be very, very helpful, which is why people do go into retreats. But of itself, you can get very nasty monks and you can get very beautiful lay people. You can get very nasty lay people and you can get very beautiful monks. The mind itself doesn't ordain. That has to be trained. And whether we train in a monastic environment or in a lay environment, we still are coming up with basically the same problems. And whether or not we can transform our negativities into the positive states, in the end just depends on us, no matter what our particular level of ordination might be.
Perfect, Jitsumana. You definitely cover all the points there. I was going to actually ask you about exactly that, what you just spoke about, not being necessarily having to ordain in order to practice and develop a kind heart. So
not at all.
We can definitely go into the path without taking ordination, and also take ordination and not really be...
You see, Philippe is half ordained. He's got half a shaved head, but the other half, he's clinging to his hair. The nuns keep saying he should donate it to the nunnery, but he...
Yes.
Maybe best of both worlds, Jitsumana, who knows? Okay, let's move on to the next question, which I thought is a very nice one. It says, I have recently read on your website that nuns can choose between sitting or walking meditation in the morning. Could you please tell more about walking meditation? Could you recommend where to find instructions for walking meditation in Tibetan Buddhism?
Yeah, that's a fair enough question. I mean, there is not actually that much about walking meditation in Tibetan Buddhism, as far as I know. They don't talk about it very much. When they talk about formal meditation, they think of it as a sitting meditation. However, some years ago, 2 of our nuns visited Thailand, and that's where they met with the practice. It was... they saw that in Thailand, they usually divide the practice, and Thailand, in all Theravadan countries, formal sitting, and then getting up and doing mindful walking. It's actually a very good idea, and the Buddha himself seems to have undertaken this. You get your body moving, but it brings the consciousness into the body, which is actually very important, that, the being mindful of our movement. The Buddha himself said we should be mindful of standing, sitting, walking, and lying down. These 4 postures, we should always be aware of when we're moving, that we're moving, instead of our mind, as we walk down the corridor thinking 10,000 things. But the one thing we're not thinking about is the movement of the body and the feet. So these 2 nuns who saw this practice in Thailand thought it was a very good practice for those nuns, and especially the younger ones, because it's early in the morning and the little ones kind of tend to, drop off. So they recognized it was a very good idea, instead of fighting their sleepiness, to get up and slowly, mindfully walk around the inside of the temple. So I'm sure on YouTube there must be good instruction on how to do walking meditation. But what the idea is that one walks slowly and puts one's attention on the soles of the feet, the feeling of the movement, of the feeling of the ground on the soles of the feet, just being aware, bringing the attention down into the movement of walking. And this also gets the attention away from the head, because often when people meditate, they tend to get stuck in their heads instead of going down into the center of their bodies. And so then this brings the attention back down. And it's very, people have gained enlightenment doing this, realizations from doing this. It's not a minor practice. And it's a nice counterbalance to all the sitting, just to get up and move very slowly, and then to sit back down again like that. It's good.
So a couple of follow-ups here. Do we need to be barefoot in order to do walking meditation, or can we use shoes? We don't need to be. Okay, good. Then, if we're doing walking meditation, do we think about what we're doing? Like, feeling the feeling on the soles of the feet, or lifting one foot? Do we have to be discursive about it, or can we just do it paying attention to the body?
I think paying attention is better, because one of the whole problems is we're thinking. So just notice, without commenting as much as possible. Just notice how the whole body shifts its balance. I mean, it's brilliant the way we walk. And of course, we're the only animals that really consistently walk upright. And the way that the body, the whole spinal system shifts its center of gravity as we lift up, move forward, go sit down, back, and then the next foot goes up, forward, down. Just to know it, notice it. Don't talk about it. Don't comment on it to ourselves. Don't chatter to ourselves. Just try to just let go and just be aware. There's no right or wrong about how to do this. And not to go too slowly, because otherwise you'll probably lose balance. But just slowly, gradually, just how the wonder of how we actually walk on this earth is amazing. And just to know that.
It seems to me, Jitsumala, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that the common point between these two practices, awareness of the breath and awareness of walking, is to bring that intentionality and that awareness faculty to something that otherwise is very automatic, isn't it?
Exactly that. I mean, and that's what awareness and mindfulness is trying to do. It's trying to wake us up to knowing things without always being distracted into other activities, or even to be just commenting on the doing, instead of just knowing this quality of being conscious. And so every activity, any activity, it doesn't have to be walking, it doesn't have to be breathing. It can be anything, including sitting. The Buddha said, sitting, standing, walking, lying down, drinking tea, washing, cleaning your teeth, combing your hair. It doesn't matter what activity. Either we are aware or we are not aware. There's no half-half. And mostly we are not aware. We're lost in our thinking and not conscious even of what we are doing.
Yes, indeed. I can barely wrap my head around the concept of just doing, but little by little. So the next two questions, Jitsumala, are kind of related, but I will read them together. You can answer them separately if you want, or you can condense them into one answer. So number 6 is saying, I've been feeling so guilty because I want to end my marriage relationship after 28 years together, but I can't, and I'm not interested to find back any emotional connection with my wife. I actually find myself wanting some loneliness and space for me. Am I wrong? And then number 7 says how to deal with situations in which we feel that our relationship is being maintained because we make an effort to maintain it. In other words, when we feel that the person is maintaining some level of relationship with us because we make an effort to maintain it, but this person does not show a connection, what would be more appropriate in this case?
Oh dear, well, I mean, I'm not a marriage counselor. And I can only give my view. This is not ultimate reality here. This is just, Tenzin Palmo saying what she thinks. And I've never been married, so, I mean, why are you asking me? Anyway, close relationships such as marriage are often a challenge, especially as the years go by and the initial attraction dies away. So I cannot possibly advise anybody on whether or not to end a marriage. There are so many factors to be considered, including the feelings of one's partner, of one's spouse. How do they feel about it, And also, of course, the financial situation. How are you, if you leave your wife, how would she manage? Of course, it's not wrong to want some solitude and space after living together for so many years. But it would also depend on how the parting would affect the other person. Would they manage to cope by themselves? What are their feelings in the matter? Maybe you could compromise by having some time alone and some time together. I mean, I don't know, because I don't know what is the background of all this relationship. I mean, in and of itself, if couples want to part and they agree on this and they part amicably, there's nothing against it. Because in the second one, I'm saying it all depends on the circumstances. It's not, I'm not a marriage counselor, I don't know. If a couple no longer feel compatible, there's nothing inherently wrong with amicably separating. And in fact, in Buddhism, there is no formal marriage ceremony, because marriage is considered to be a social contract and not a sacred bond. So while there are, official ceremonies for ordination, there is no marriage ceremony. In fact, what happens is a couple agree to live together and create a family. Everybody agrees. They give them, homilies on being good to each other and taking care. They usually make offerings to monks who do some chanting, and that's it. There are no formal vows of obedience or lifelong fidelity. However, nonetheless, most Buddhist couples have as good a record of staying together as anybody else. Doesn't mean because you haven't gone through making a vowed commitment that you're not therefore committed. I mean, most couples stay together, raise their families, and look after each other in sickness and in health, just the same. So karmically, there is nothing negative about separating on good terms if one no longer finds the relationship meaningful. I mean, you're not offending anybody, and the higher-ups. The bodhisattvas are not all going to go, but it depends on how you do it and the feelings on both sides. That's the point. It's not a sacred commitment, but it is a heart commitment. And so we have to regard, how these things are carried out, how much harm and hurt you could cause to the other, how the children would feel about it, and so forth. There are many, many, questions to be raised in this. I don't know the background behind all this. But all I'm saying is that from a Buddhist point of view, you're not offending any higher deity. It's purely, between the couple, how they feel, and maybe it's time to go on. In Buddhism, it's often that at a certain age, as in Hinduism, the couples part in order to give more attention to their spiritual life. So the husband maybe takes temporary ordination, the wife takes temporary ordination, they split, and then carry on doing their own practices and generating good karma for next life.
I think that's very useful, Jitsumala. And even though you're not a marriage counselor, I think that is very sound and sane advice. Perhaps I think one of the key points that you mentioned is that it needs to be a conversation, isn't it? Any parting, which we can assume at some point will happen, if it involves somebody else, shouldn't be one-sided, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Okay, so let's move on to the next one then. Number 8 says, how can I apply loving kindness and compassion to my husband that has been drinking to the point that now he is an alcoholic? Knowing that this is an illness, an addiction, or whatever, I have heard all sorts of commentaries, and nothing has really worked. Beginning with his denying for his alcoholism, so he's denying his condition. What would you advise, Chitsumana?
Well, again, I mean, this is a very tragic, though it's also a very common situation. Even here in India and in the Himalayas, alcoholism is a big problem, especially for the men. And also the denial. This, of course, is also very, very common. No, I'm just drinking a little, I'm fine, I'm in control of the situation, when the situation is controlling them. So again, we are all the owners of our own karma, our actions, and it's very difficult to change another's behavior. I mean, it's difficult enough to change our own behavior. How many can? And especially when that other person sees no reason to change or denies that there's any problem. So what to do? Then if they are in denial, then they presumably will not have any motivation to join anything like the AA or any similar group, because the problem is that they don't see there's any problem. So maybe you could, I don't know, maybe you could reach a compromise, right? And be tough. For instance, you can say, all right, I'm not giving you any more meals unless you cut down on your drinking. Then see what they do. Starvation or drink. You have your choice, right? Cut down on drinking to manageable levels, not totally abstination, but at least, talk together. Have you really discussed this? Explain how his excessive drinking is hurting you. And being in denial doesn't help. So try being honest and bring it all out into the open, and then see how you can go from there. But I also feel that finally we have to accept that this is samsara, and we have lessons to learn. Not other people have lessons to learn, we also have lessons to learn, including accepting people and the situations as they are, and working on changing our own attitudes. Because sometimes we cannot change others, well, then our only option is to change ourselves.
I'm going to anticipate 100 emails coming in after that, just to and just jump in and ask, but that doesn't mean that you stay with somebody who's an alcoholic. That doesn't mean that you put up with somebody's addiction, but it means that accepting it also means taking care of yourself and making the most skillful decision, right?
Yeah. I mean, she's not talking about leaving him. So I didn't bring that in. I mean, I was thinking that a number of women I know live with very heavily alcoholic husbands, including some lamas. And the women just, oh, well, that's the way he is. And when his friends bring him home drunk, carrying him back, they put him to bed and let him get over it the next day. I mean, they don't make a big thing of it. I would say that if they are abusive and violent as a result of the alcoholism, then that is a big red light shining. Watch out. But if they're just maudlin or stupid, or just, kind of drink themselves into a stupor, oh, well, what the hell? I mean, I wouldn't. I mean, if they don't want to change, and they're clearly not going to change, then we would then, in that case, just have to accept the fact that's how they're going to be. Isn't it sad? What can we do? We can't force someone to break these bad habits. if they wish to do it, they can do it. But if they don't wish to do it, then what are you going to do? Provided it's not in any danger. I mean, if they are violent when they are, then that is something else completely different. But if they're just, drunk to the point of, being drunk, then what to do? It's a big problem everywhere, I assure you, and in the Himalayan regions also, especially before they had television probably, when they didn't have much to do during the long dark winters. The solution was just to drink. And then depending on the person's character, either they just were, as I say, fairly maudlin, or they became violent. And violent is something quite different. That really, one has to say, absolutely no.
Yeah, I guess it's really, I mean, I feel for it because it's seeing somebody you care about addicted to anything, never mind alcohol, but anything. And of course, your first wish, your first aspiration is, how can I help this person? But as you say, there's very little one can do. I mean, it's very hard already to change oneself, to change others, almost impossible. So
unless they want to change, it's not going to happen, is the fact of the matter. I mean, if you can motivate them somehow to want to change, but if they don't have the motivation and they're in denial, then you just have to accept.
Well, thank you so much for that, Jatumala. I'm sure that will help a lot of people.
No, it's not helpful, but it's true. I mean, it's hard and it's painful. But in fact, I mean, a lot of people, especially women, think they marry somebody and that their good influence will change them. But almost invariably it doesn't. So, I mean, it's hard.
It is what it is. Let's move on then to the next question. It says, I often have bad thoughts. I do not like those kind of thoughts, but I could not stop them. I really hate that. The bad thoughts arise in my mind automatically. I really hope and wish I will never have such kind of thoughts, but it's still there and it appears in my mind space at any time. When they appear, it makes me hate myself more. I always ask myself, how can I have such kind of thinking? I feel I disrespect my Lama when I have such kind of thoughts. I feel I create more negative karma when I have such kind of thoughts. I feel hopeless. What can I do in this case?
I would say, well, first of all, just relax. And understand that all thoughts, good or bad, are just like empty bubbles. They're just impulses in the brain. They're not real. They're not solid. So please just learn how to sit back and just observe the thoughts without any judgment. Just seeing them as thoughts. That's all they are. They're not true. They're not me. They're not mine. As the Buddha advised, give loving kindness and compassion to yourself. What's all this I hate myself? Where's that coming from? That's worse than the bad thoughts, right? So we give loving kindness and compassion first to ourselves and then outwards towards others. There's no point in being angry with yourself. That just creates more negative thoughts, right? So look at our thoughts nakedly, without judgment. But we can name them. If you want, you can name them and then release them. Let them go and say, bye-bye. Okay, anger thought. Okay, lustful thought. Okay, jealous thought. I've seen you. I know you. Bye. It occurs to me, when the Buddha was before his enlightenment and after his enlightenment, right up until his time of passing into nirvana, again and again, Mara turned up. Mara is the Buddhist equivalent of like Satan. He's the tempter. He's the one that comes along and says, hey, look, what are you doing? You're crazy. Follow me. And every time, the Buddha would have nice conversations with him actually, but at the end the Buddha would say, or his monks and nuns would say if Mara turned up for them, "I know you, Mara." And Mara would say, "He knows me." And he would go away. No fight left in him. He was just completely deflated, like a balloon. You prick it with the pin of knowing, of recognition, and it deflates immediately. That's it. He knows me. So when a bad thought comes up, you can say anger, and the thought will think, "Oh, she knows me," and it will go. Right? Really, really. Everyone, right? The problem only comes when we feed the thoughts, because maybe we secretly like them. Some thoughts are quite juicy, and they're not good thoughts, but they are thoughts. So people, they feed them. It's like a fire, and you're putting more oil on the fire burns up, right? And so therefore the problem comes, we feed our thoughts, or we get upset and we start blaming ourselves and getting angry and flagellating ourselves, and then that just makes them worse, right? What was started off as a tiny, tiny little thought becomes bigger and bigger and bigger because we're giving it so much attention. So the point is not to cling. Good thoughts or bad thoughts, just let them go back into the space from which they arose, right? The thought comes up, we recognize it, and we release it. We don't follow it, we don't hit ourselves over the head. They're just dark clouds, right? Arising in the sky, and they can just dissolve back into the sky again. There's no problem. Everybody has stupid thoughts. Everybody. Until we are completely egoless, completely enlightened, we will have sometimes really stupid negative thoughts. Completely doesn't matter if we recognize them and let them go.
And taking it back to basics, that's also where our shamatha practice becomes quite handy, isn't it?
Yes.
So that we can
recognize it. That's the whole point. We can see it.
And also recognize the reaction, right? Recognize that we're feeling, oh, I shouldn't be having that ugly thought. How ugly am I? We can also recognize that and come back to
and laugh at it. Bad thoughts also don't like you to laugh at them. It's if you have any thoughts also of fear, of anger, or lust, or jealousy, if you just look at that thought and you laugh at it, it will just disappear, because it takes itself very seriously. And if you're not taking it seriously, it has nothing to stand on. So the whole point is not to get all upset about our negative thoughts, especially when we're practicing. But even during the day, if we recognize that thought, in the moment of recognition is the moment of its release. The clinging is the problem. Even if we cling to good thoughts, any kind of clinging, as the Buddha said, is the cause of our dukkha, of our suffering, of our, feeling upset.
Thank you, Jitsuma. I think that's a wonderful clarification and a very good attitude to adopt, to be more light and have that humor, to laugh at the thoughts and not take ourselves too seriously. So finally, we come to the last question, which is quite a practical one, and it goes: there comes a point in practicing and studying when there is no way to proceed further if there is no money. There is always a chance to get paid work for some time. Knowingly, this will harm the Dharma practice. How to find the balance?
Of course, we can work and practice at the same time. What do you think Dharma practice is? It's not just sitting on our cushion. There are many qualities needed on the path to enlightenment, including mindfulness, ethics, kindness, patience, goodwill, which are enhanced and cultivated in the company of other people, including difficult people, right? If we cannot maintain our ability to be aware and kind while we are working, then what's the use? Really, the Dharma should be at the center of our lives at all times, whether in formal practice or out in the world. And especially, we should cultivate loving awareness at all times and in all situations. So please don't think of work as being inimical to our practice. If we do it with good heart and mindfulness, it is the practice.
That's beautiful practical advice as always, Jitsumala. And I think people have a hard time believing that we can actually do it, but I really do think it's possible. And there's so many scenarios that in, real life, as people like to call it, we have to interact with people who are not necessarily easy, and that's exactly where we have so many opportunities to put what we've learned into action, isn't it?
What interests me is what is real life? I mean, what do they think? That, living outside of the West and outside of a city is not real? I mean, why is it less real than, wherever you are, that's where your mind is, and so that's your reality, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I mean, why you have to be in the hustle and bustle and watching television all the time and going to movies and parties, and that's real life, and sitting quietly reading a Dharma book or, going to work and taking care of others is not real. Isn't that a weird expression, though? Real life.
It is. Absolutely. I totally agree, Jitsuma. It's kind of bizarre to have that. And that separation, Oh, right now I'm here in a retreat. This is not real life. Yeah.
It's more real because you're with your mind. Whereas most people are in an escape mode, either looking into their computers or looking at television or just gossiping around, and the one place they are not looking is where the only reality actually abides, which is within one's own heart mind. I mean, we're all trying desperately to escape from looking at the one place where reality actually resides. Ironic.
It is indeed perhaps a symptom of modern times, but I think with your precious advice and all these techniques that come from thousands of years ago and that were verified by so many practitioners, that we can definitely at least have a starting point to work with our minds and make friends with our minds, isn't it?
Well, it's the only thing we're going to take with us, so we better get to work on it now, right? Everything else we leave behind.
Yeah.
Well, may we be able to do so, Jitsumala, and if you could please dedicate, if there's been any merit, any good karma, any positive potential that we created in this meeting, in this gathering together with all the people from all around, how can we best offer it for the benefit of others?
Well, I think the world desperately needs as much lightness and kindness and good heart as possible, and to be courageous in a time when people are so afraid, are so paranoid, are so caught up in their fears. The Bodhisattva is fearless. And this is what we must all aspire to, the fearless heart of compassion and wisdom. May it be.
Thank you so much, Jitsumala, and thank you to everyone who participates of these sessions. I would encourage you to continue to send these wonderful questions and continue to be curious about the spiritual path in whatever tradition you're practicing from. And I hope to see you all again. Thank you all so much. Have a lovely morning, afternoon, or evening. Goodbye.